Post-feminism is a movement of totalitarian absolutist zealots, which is why I will never identify as a member. To be fair, I'm one of those annoying, slippery centrists who refuse to get bogged down by any particular label, but feminism is one of my biggest exceptions. I gave the current third, fourth wave feminism multiple chances over the years, and every time you simply ask a question, try and learn more, it's taken as personally offensive, politically poisonous, and usually just get shouted at, passively aggressively sassed, or blocked. I'm a reasonable person who can be persuaded by evidence to back a policy stance if I'm adequately convinced. However, at no point have I seen anything even resembling that. Around 4 or 5 years ago, I first stumbled across YouTube skepticism, and at the same time went fairly far down the anarcho-capitalist, libertarian echo chamber. It took me a year, maybe 18 months to escape that, and I did learn a lot about the importance of individual liberty, but overall the ideology wasn't for me. Instead of putting blind faith in capitalism to solve all of mankind's problems, I realised a more nuanced approach was necessary. Coming out of that black hole, I still kept watching and discovering new YouTube skeptics, and began to encounter the alt-right. So about a year and a half ago, I decided I was in too much of an echo chamber, and if you get all of your information from Sargon, Undoomed, Tealdia, you're in a similar, if not opposite position to someone who follows only BuzzFeed, Upworthy, and The Guardian, I figured. And the more ridiculous and extreme the stories became of SJWs promoting segregation, openly spouting misandry, lying about basic biology,
It's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex.
the more and more suspicious I became that these skeptics were in fact just strawmanning, or else finding the most ridiculous examples they could, and trying to extrapolate them out to represent the entire movement. It was at this time that I started questioning skepticism itself. Perhaps there was some virtue to emotional, intuitive reasoning to fill in gaps in knowledge. Perhaps in some situations evidence is unattainable, or you can't quantify it, and using intuition might actually be more useful than simply saying you don't know. So I gave feminism a chance as part of this experiment. Several chances, and then some more chances, and I've just fucking given up. You cannot reason with these people. And even to try and get them to engage in reasoning, just to get them to sit down at the table and talk, is a fucking challenge. Same as evangelical Republicans or left-wing anarchists. They have one way of thinking, and that is the only way of thinking that they are capable of, let alone want to do. Maybe 1/4 of feminists I encounter could actually give a properly structured, logically coherent answer. And when I say they could, I don't mean that they chose to demonstrate this skill whenever they could, more like a party trick they'd pull out on special occasions. Now, I'll showcase plenty of examples on my channel of this, but the scariest thing is just how there is only one monolithic feminism, and it is all-encompassing. You cannot pick and choose, you must believe unblinkingly in the whole entity, top to bottom. Just type in feminist unless, and thousands of search results come up, each with conditions attached to what being a proper feminist is. The fact that this comic even exists, let alone is a staple of progressive thought, is enough to prove that only the most progressive, most extreme voice can be the one that is followed, and anything less than that is excluding someone and their struggle. Feminism is incapable of saying no whenever a new struggle can be latched onto, much like the Borg or a chimera or badges collected by scouts. Each issue must be included as to be inclusionary as possible. If your feminism isn't anti-imperialist, decolonialist, culturally relativistic, anti-Eurocentric, anti-fat shaming, anti-period shaming, anti-body shaming, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-class structure, anti-ableist, trans-inclusive, anti-heteronormative, anti-cis normative, pro-choice, anti-phallocentrist, then sorry, unless you're all of those things and not a penny less, you cannot be considered a proper feminist. Not to mention whether or not you are even allowed to call yourself an intersectional feminist if you're white, or male, or straight, or cisgendered. No, you get to be an ally, which is a totally non-discriminatory distinction, and a totally logical and fair way to treat people with the same ideology as you. Do you see conservatives saying to Thomas Sowell, or Ben Carson, or Walter Williams, "Sorry, you're black, you can't be one of us"? Do you hear the alt-right saying, "Sorry, Milo Yiannopoulos, you're gay, you can't be conservative"? The last time that I got banned from a feminist Facebook page was during the debate on whether or not a man can ever be as good a feminist as a woman. Hey, irony! Fucking irony! But let's just say that you're allowed to be a feminist, regardless of the colour of your skin or your genitalia, then you have to pass the ideology test. Now, I'm currently preparing a debunking of an Owen Jones article, and a particular line stuck in my head. There are so many practical demands that men should support. And this line just stuck out to me, because it's in the middle of an article where he's basically saying that you have to throw any shred of masculinity you have under the bus, because 1 in 10, 1 in 20 men are abusive bastards. That is not specific. That's not a measured practical demand. That is an extremely wide and scattershot, collective group guilting of an entire gender. Whenever you try and point this out, you're met with responses such as, tear down the kyriarchy, smash the patriarchy, fuck the white supremacist capitalist system. These are not specific demands, they are just idiotic, meaningless slogans. I would be glad to accept a policy proposal that has a pro-feminist slant if I were actually given evidence as to why this should be the case. For example, removing taxes on tampons. A former feminist friend of mine called Jessica, who made sense roughly 10% of the time, is correct in her repeated demand for them to be brought down in cost or otherwise made freely available, especially for homeless or financially struggling women. She didn't actually make any arguments herself, but she did share some enlightening articles. Economically, it reduces inequality because women spend hundreds of pounds a year on feminine hygiene products. Also, it can be argued that it is unfair to pay for a vital health product, not to mention that cleanliness is a large barrier in terms of getting an economically marginalised woman back to work, back into normal society. And finally, in terms of public health, if poorer or homeless women can't afford proper sanitary care while they're going through a hard time, this can lead to future fertility and gynecological problems, which burdens the National Health Service, and also has a moral imperative to it about looking out for people, regardless of their sex, in which case this is women. Naturally, this comes at a cost to the taxpayer by subsidising or making tampons free. But this is something where you can use reason and empiricism to see if there is a net welfare increase. This is contrary to the nutcasery of free bleeders, or the anti-period shaming movement, which are utterly subjective and emotionally driven. Why does society not worship the leaking of blood, mucus, and lumps of deceased uterine tissue through the vagina? You can't cite basic biology or rationality to try and convince such proponents. It is entirely dependent on how they feel, and what social outlook they have. Another case I noted recently was an everyday feminism article, titled, "Stop having interests in other people's cultures, or else you're a bigoted, oppressive piece of shit." One unwise person said that this has gone too far. This was ridiculous. After all, cultural studies and sociology are subjective disciplines, right? So people are allowed to have different opinions? Nope. In an Orwellian fashion, the admin says, "No, we're educating you. You're refusing to listen. People don't stand by marginalised folks conditionally. We are educating you. We are educating you." Nope. Again, it's called a fucking opinion, and yours isn't always the right one. Yes, there are conditions attached to things. Yes, people can listen to what you have to say, and then subsequently form a different opinion to yours. It doesn't make them wrong, it doesn't make them bigots. You fucking intolerant, crazy whack job. A further golden case of totalitarian, no-compromise masochism is this response to an everyday feminism piece called, "If you're white and anything left of centre, you're probably still a racist, horrible person," to which two privileged white women say in the comments that you have to apologise before you even have learnt what it is that you have allegedly done wrong. It kind of spits in the face of several centuries old legal tradition that one is able to face one's accuser and also have the right to be told what it is that one is being accused of. Do you realise how fucking crazy that is? If I came up to you in the middle of the street and just randomly shouted at you, "Or you, apologise to me," wouldn't it be natural for you to say, "Well, what for? I've never met you before, have I done anything to you?" And then, I just scream back at you, "Ugh! I don't have to explain my oppression to you." Then I just sort of push you over and walk away. Wouldn't you think that's a weird encounter? But no, that's the standard of feminism. That's how the ground troops think. Apologise before you even know what you've done, apparently wrong, not even having the right to be told why or what. It's kind of medieval, Inquisition-y, don't you think? And then, once you've done all of that, then you have to 100% agree with everything feminism tells you, no half measures or compromises. The last and starkest example of this thinking is from this video by non-binary demigirl YouTuber Ashley Mardell, this time featuring Riley Dennis, called Hey Anti-Feminists.
Community out there on YouTube made up of viewers and creators who seem set on silencing anyone who talks about anything they deem too social justice-y.
Well, of course, I forgot that the word too is now considered sexist and oppressive.
Almost like there's a threshold for them of social justice issues that are all right to discuss and support. There's general LGBT rights, sometimes binary trans identities like trans men and trans women, sometimes mental health advocacy. But anything above that threshold, like rape culture, trigger warnings, privilege, non-binary genders, Black Lives Matter, and definitely feminism are not okay in the slightest to these people.
Yep, and people are entitled to a threshold. Not just for social justice issues, but any issue. I can believe in individual liberty, but not to the extent that it infringes on the rights of others. I can't just shoot someone and say, hey man, it's a free country. Similarly, I am pro-free enterprise, but I'm not so pro-free market that I wouldn't want to regulate the level of lead in children's toys, or not have independent food safety regulators. I might be for a 50% tax rate on incomes over £100,000, but I might think that an 80% tax rate is a bad idea because it would just destroy more income than it would redistribute. Everyone has a threshold. For example, if a conservative were to say not enough is being done in the Middle East, we should put down ground troops, and another conservative says, no, let's just nuke the entire of the Middle East, and one said to the other, well, isn't that going a bit too far? And the other conservative said, oh, well, that's having a threshold. You would think that's fucking insane, right? Plus, you can have more than one opinion from one perspective. For example, if you were to look at the case of humanitarian intervention, which is military intervention for the welfare of the local population. For example, what was attempted in Libya, what was attempted in Yugoslavia and Iraq. If you were to try to prevent genocide through an invasion, one person might say, well, it's not justified because you're invading a country, and you might create more violence than you had intentionally in the first place. The other person might say, well, no, you can save lives. You can take the same basic desire, the same good intention, which is to reduce the amount of hardship, and you can actually have two different opinions on something. I see no articles saying you can't call yourself an ordo-liberal if you're not a real libertarian if your centrism isn't these 23 following things, then you're a piece of shit. And people have thresholds, and recognizing that and working around that is the solution, rather than berating them for not being immediately extreme enough. Much like the radical left, the conservative right too is growing more partisan, so much so that centrist Republicans are called cuck-servatives, or rhinos, Republicans in name only. Does feminism really want to be comparable to staunch right-wingers? Why is it inclusive to everything other than a differing opinion? Why not respond to and engage with criticism or confusion, rather than just denigrate or block anyone who disagrees? If feminism is the correct way forward, it shouldn't be so hard to get your point across without having to shout sexist at someone. If people don't immediately accept that gender identity is 100% constructed, biological sex binary is 100% constructed, sexual orientation and gender are 100% constructed and fluid, then the answer is to provide evidence why that is the case to the 98% of cisgendered heterosexual people, not get angry at them because 1, they exist, and 2, have a threshold that aren't willing to go as full feminist as you. No wonder there's been such a backlash of conservatism this past year, with Brexit, which I didn't vote for my own reasons, and the election of President Trump, who, again, I wouldn't have voted for my own reasons. No wonder that the MRAs and the manosphere split off from feminism, because they felt stifled and castigated there. If you keep pushing to the radical far left, and have a totalitarian, hive-minded approach to every issue through one lens, and one lens only, you are not going to make progress as quickly as you are capable of, and for people who are just interested in open dialogue, people who are in the middle and open to persuasion, you cut them out and make them sick and fucking tired.